All right. John Miller is a pal and also one of the best writers about important popular fiction. And he has written a book called Reading Around, Journalism on Authors, Artists, and Ideas. I like to talk about authors, artists, and ideas. The news has been so overwhelming that we never get a chance. John is the director of the Herbert H. Dow II Program in American Journalism at Hillsdale College. He runs their journalism department. He's also a national correspondent for National Review. He writes for the Wall Street Journal all the time. But his pieces, when I read them about not when I say pop fiction, I don't mean just the latest spy novel. I mean the great popular writers of English and American history. It's like eating cake. It's like it's so great to see a mind like John's engage with this kind of literature. We talk together. Here it is. John, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on, Drew.
I got to tell you, I love when you write about writers. I love it. I love this book. I really do. I mean, it's one of those things you can dip into, and you don't have to read it from beginning to end right away. But I just love your stuff on, especially on popular culture, but also on some of the classics. It's just great.
Well, thanks so much. I appreciate you saying that.
So we're going to talk about this, but before we talk about this, you are the head of the journalism department at Hillsdale. Is that right?
Yeah, I run the journalism program at Hillsdale College in Michigan.
Okay, so here's what I want to ask you. I want to ask you a couple of things. One is Hillsdale College has this wonderful reputation of being kind of different from all the other universities. Does it deserve? I know they're your employer, so you can't bite the hand. But what is different about Hillsdale? Why is it so admired?
Well, first, it's a small liberal arts college, and only 1,400 students here. But it's college as it should be. Unlike a lot of schools that are moving away from a traditional classic curriculum, we ask that of our students. We demand that of them. So they come and they get trained in these great works, and they get it from great teachers here.
And what do you teach in journalism? What's your philosophy that you bring to that?
Well, the first point is we believe you learn journalism by doing journalism. So we don't teach it that much. But primarily, we get the students to work on the campus newspaper and to work at the campus radio station, and to learn how to write, learn how to talk, and learn how to perform in these different kinds of media.
That's cool. So if you learn journalism by doing journalism, they can't go to CNN, for instance.
Exactly. Exactly. Although CNN ought to hire my people.
Yeah, they probably would. That would change everything. When I hammer the journalists all the time because I really do feel that they are living in a make-believe universe in which they're oppressed, in which they're heroic, and in fact they're just spewing the Democrat line. I mean, I know it's an old song, and the conservatives are always singing it. But am I totally wrong about this?
I say that journalism has never been better than it is right now, and it's never been worse than it is right now. And it's never been better in the sense that we have so much information available at our fingertips. I remember when I got into journalism 25 years ago, if I wanted to, and as a young reporter in Washington, D.C., if I wanted to know what President Bush said at last week's press conference, I couldn't Google it. I had to, call the White House press office and beg them to fax me a transcript, right? And maybe they would do it, and maybe it would come through, and maybe the fax machine would actually have paper rolled up in it and all that kind of stuff. But now it's just at our fingertips, and it's at the fingertips of everybody. And so our ability to gather information and put it together and assemble it as journalists never has been better. And so I think I like to think that it's really helped my work when I write on politics and candidates and elections and policies and so on and so forth. Having said all that, you're right. There's plenty of rotten journalism out there. And sometimes I like to say, we shouldn't let 99% of all journalists give the rest a bad name.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about Reading Around, which is a series of books, a series of pieces on authors, artists, and ideas. And of course, one of the things that I love so much about this is, it says, you have a quote here, a blurb says, one of the best literary journalists in the country from the Chronicle of Higher Education. You are, there's no question about this. One of the things I love about it is you write seriously about genre writers. And as a genre writer and as somebody who takes genre writing seriously, it is wonderful to see that. One of the first pieces I ever read by you that I just thought was utterly great was your piece about H.P. Lovecraft. Explain a little bit, for people who don't know who H.P. Lovecraft is, explain a little bit who he was and why you feel he's an important writer.
So he's one of the great horror writers in American literature. If we think, sometimes Edgar Allan Poe is called the greatest horror writer in American literature, and that's an okay claim. That's a defensible claim. I kind of prefer Lovecraft and think he's better than Poe, but he's in that tradition of the sort of macabre writers who include Edgar Allan Poe or Ambrose Bierce and so on. And Lovecraft wrote primarily in the 20s and 30s. He wrote for these pulp magazines that nobody took seriously. He was poorly paid. And a lot of what he wrote, frankly, is trash. It's not worth reading. But when he is good, he is really, really good. And he has a handful of stories, about a dozen. Some of them short stories, some of them almost novella length stories that just make my head spin. And when I discovered them as a teenager, they just made me think longer and deeper and harder about a lot of first things. And so he's a genre writer. He wrote for these trashy pulp magazines, and yet he's dealing with some of the biggest questions out there about, why are we here? Does the universe care? And so on and so forth. And his answers to those questions are often troubling. And I find myself in adulthood disagreeing with them. And yet he's riveting.
Yeah. No, he is a terrific writer. And as you say, at his best, he is really good. You and I share a kind of fascination with actual ghost stories, which is a kind of a very, very, it's kind of like jazz. It's a very limited sphere. You write about M.R. James in the book, Arthur Machen, two writers I just love. What is it about these stories? I cannot stay away from them. I do not go a year without reading at least one collection of them. What do you think it is that is so amazingly gripping about them?
That's a great question. And I ask that of myself all the time, and I'm answering it in different ways. Edith Wharton, a great American novelist who wrote her share of ghost stories, talked about the fun of the shudder. The idea that a good ghost story can create a kind of pleasing sensation. And I think we can experience that when we just enjoy it and can scare us. And it's paradoxically there we can take a kind of pleasure in that. I like stories that are haunting, that leave me thinking, leave me checking behind the curtains before I go to bed. And that's not for everybody, is it? My wife can't stand it. And this is not everybody likes a good horror movie. Yeah. Even the good horror movies, there are plenty of bad ones. I mean, not everybody's into that, but I've always found pleasure in it. And one of the things that a good ghost story does is that it attacks some of the materialist assumptions that are out there in our culture all the time right now. They're supernatural stories, of course. They can't be explained through normal science. And if you're like me and you believe, as the famous line from Hamlet, there's more in heaven and earth, Horatio, than is dreamt of in your philosophy. If you believe that that's true, or that maybe it's true, a good ghost story can really speak to that. I had a student once who very sweet young lady who said, "Mr. Miller, why do you like ghost stories?" Sort of appalled at the notion. This is a good church going kid, She goes to church every Sunday morning and so forth. And I said to her, if ghosts are real, it means that there's life after death. And that just stopped her in her tracks. And it made her think differently about the whole thing. And I don't know if ghosts are real. Charles Dickens said, or M.R. James, I think, said, "I'm willing to consider the evidence if you present it to me." And of course, I approach a lot of this stuff with skepticism. But if ghosts are real, it does mean that there is an afterlife. And that has a pleasing possibility to it.
I agree that there's something under the chill that is encouraging. I've never had 10 people in a room and asked if anyone has seen a ghost and I've always gotten someone who says yes. If you have 10 people in a room, someone has experienced something ghostly. I never have, but I have. Have you read Susan Hill at all?
No.
You should try her. She wrote The Woman in Black, which has been running in the West End forever, and they made it into a bad movie, but it's her ghost stories are absolutely terrific. You write about Frankenstein, but moving on from ghost stories to the Gothic, you write about Frankenstein and said something really surprising, which was you felt, obviously Mary Shelley is always held up by feminists as a great writer. It is a great book, but you actually peg it as an anti-feminist book in some ways.
Well, so Frankenstein, written 2 centuries ago by Mary Shelley when she was a teenager, for crying out loud, is in some ways the very first work of science fiction. We sometimes think of it as a horror novel, and it does have elements of horror, that's for sure. But that's a legacy of the Universal monster movies from the 1930s more than anything else. But it's a serious work of fiction that deals with ethics and our responsibility to each other and what it means to be a person and so on. And yes, she's often put forward by feminists as a great feminist hero, and part of that is the mere accomplishment of a woman in that world. Writing what she did, and it wasn't unheard of. I mean, this is the time of Jane Austen, of course, one of the great geniuses of our language. So women did have plenty of achievements back then, but it was harder, that's for sure. And so she's presented as a kind of an important figure. You go, girl, Mary Shelley. That sort of a thing. And I think we can give them that.
Sure.
But it's also a cautionary tale about broken homes and bad parenting and a lot of the things that we might associate with contemporary feminism. And Mary Shelley, Shelley's a complicated figure, and Frankenstein is a rich book with lots of different meanings and possible interpretations. But one of them is a quite conservative reading that says, don't mess with things you don't understand. And sometimes the things that are closest home and dearest to us are, in fact, the most important.
The other thing that you do in this book, reading around journalism on authors, artists, and ideas, you take certain writers seriously who are not normally taken seriously. Guys that I really like and I read all the time, guys like Dean Koontz and Daniel Silva. I'm working my way through Silva's stuff. I find it just addictive. And
isn't he great?
He's so entertaining. I like the fact that the guy goes and kills the enemies of the Jews, which is everyone. So it's like if you're some Danish guy, he kills you for something that happened in Denmark, thousands of years ago. But no, he really is entertaining. And Kuntz is just a riveting writer. What is it you see that these guys are doing? You call Dean Kuntz an artist of ideas, which I agree with. What is it you see them doing that other people don't get?
Well, first and foremost, they're entertaining writers. I mean, I pick up a Daniel Silva book and I'm just going to get caught up in the story and enjoy turning the pages. I want to know what's going to happen. Same with Dean Koontz. They're just great storytellers on the surface. But beneath it all, they're dealing with quite serious topics. Dean Koontz has considerations of bioethics, government, overweening government. I mean, his topics change from story to story. Daniel Silva, of course, you mentioned it, his great hero is Gabriel Allon, who is with the Israeli Secret Service, and he marches around the world, mostly Europe, trying to defend Israel against its enemies. Yeah. And you read this book, and it's a great story. It's a great espionage story. It's always cat and mouse games with him and the terrorists and so forth. But beneath it all is a sense that the state of Israel is worth defending, that freedom is not for free, and that we've got to fight for these causes, and that Israel is a worthy state and needs friends in the world. Yeah, and he doesn't whitewash Israel either, but he just says this is a good place and it deserves to live. So one of the questions I get asked all the time is because books have kind of gone out of fashion. A lot of people don't read anymore. Their vision is very limited. If you don't read books, I really believe this. If you don't read actual books, your vision of the world becomes incredibly pinched and small. Where would you begin if you wanted to educate yourself to the great literature? How would you start to do that? Well, I think it has to start in childhood, frankly. To develop the habits of reading when you're young and the enjoyment of it. What if you want to catch up, though? You say, "Here I am." But where do we start now? Yeah. First, I would say, if you're not in the habit of reading, go pick up a Daniel Silva book or a Dean Koontz book and just enjoy the story. You can think hard about the topics and learn a lot and so forth. Ultimately, what are the great books? Very quickly we get to Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Aeneid and by Virgil and all of that, and Dante and Milton and so forth. That's all great stuff. you can ease yourself into that too. I mean, there are great works of American literature we can pick up right now. Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah, great book.
What a great book that is.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, we just did at Hillsdale College, we just did an online course on Mark Twain. And I have a piece in that. I do a little roundtable with the lecturers. I learned so much about Mark Twain just taking that course. And I always thought he was a good writer and actually teach some of his journalism here at Hillsdale College.
Yeah.
But I just rediscovered Huckleberry Finn in a way that was unexpected and profound because of these great lectures. So that's another way. Take an online course with Hillsdale College. So we have them on Shakespeare, we have them on Jane Austen, and as I mentioned, this Mark Twain one was really good. Or read Ernest Hemingway. Yeah. Another great writer gives us a lot to chew over, and who's deceptively simple.
He's very easy to read. Very easy to read. John Miller, one of my favorite writers about writers, reading around journalism on authors, artists, and ideas. It really is a terrific book, John. You did a great job.
Thanks, Drew. Thanks for reading it.
It's great seeing you.